Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy. Today, my favorite targets from rounds 1 through 5 of your fantasy football drafts. People say you can't lose your league at the draft. That just is not true. It's not factual. You can absolutely win or lose your league in the first 5 rounds of your draft. If you're hitting on guys like Josh Jacobs last season, you could have won your league in and of itself. If you drafted guys in the early rounds that really flopped, that might lose your league in and of itself. So these are some very important picks. We haven't had the chance to talk about some of the guys I love in the early rounds. Definitely want to do that today. And then later this week, we'll also do my players that I want to avoid in these early rounds. But again, these will be 5 players, ones at various positions. If you guys enjoyed today's video, be sure to let me know. Subscribe to the channel. Maybe by the time you're watching this, we've reached 30,000 subscribers here on the OwnersBox YouTube channel. Would really appreciate it if you drop a sub, turn those post notifications on, and like today's video if you enjoyed. Let's hear about where you're picking in your drafts, and as well, some early round targets you love or you're looking to fade. Would love to talk about them down below, but let's get into these players. First up is Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. He's currently going as the running back 3. Drafted in the middle parts, anywhere from like the 107 to the 109 in your fantasy football drafts right now. For me, he's my running back 2 on the season. I love the opportunity he has as being that top 10 pick out of Texas. Now, I had a tweet just earlier last week talking about how perhaps we're overlooking the fact that this Falcons team ran the ball and had the most rushing attempts of any team other than the 2019 Baltimore Ravens of the last 13 years of the NFL. They ran the ball 559 times last season. The Ravens obviously ran it more in that 2019 season, the season that Lamar Jackson won MVP. But the difference is the Ravens ran the ball 176 times with their quarterback, Lamar Jackson, while the Falcons didn't run the ball much with their QBs. I think they probably ran Mariota maybe like 55 times or so. So there's a vast majority of these carries going to running backs and going to Bijan. There's going to be conversation of, oh, how are we going to have Tyler Algier, completely fizzle out in this offense, not get his opportunities? He can still have opportunities, and Bijan can still return on his draft capital. I love the opportunity we have with this team. When you consider the fact they managed to do this while finishing 7-10 last season. They didn't even have a winning record, and they managed to run the ball at such a high level. When looking at Sharp Football, we have the strength of schedule for the season, and the Falcons and the Saints are by far the 2 easiest on the year. You look at also, their win total set in Vegas, it's set at 8.5, expecting them to win right around 9 games this season, really compete in the division. That's going to be great for running backs, more positive game scripts to be able to run the football as well. So I really like the opportunity we have with Robinson. But let's not just get into the offense. Let's talk about Bijan as a player. Invested with an 8th overall pick, like I mentioned earlier, something that doesn't happen very often at the running back position, but the last 5 running backs to go as top 10 picks in the NFL draft have all finished running back 11 or better. Zeke and Saquon finished as RB2s in that season, and again, that's where I have Bijan in my rankings, and I really compare this to Zeke's situation when you look at it from 2016. I think he's going to post 300-plus carries. I think he's going to easily surpass 30-plus receptions. He's a fantastic receiver, an explosive player. He has the pass-catching chops, the pass-catching prowess. Saw it at Texas. He posted 41 touchdowns in 31 career games, can score the touchdowns as well. So Bijan is one of my favorite, if not my absolute favorite player in the first round of your fantasy drafts, and one I'm definitely reaching on, willing to take within my first 5 picks as well. Next up, in round 2, going as the wide receiver 9, currently in the middle parts of the 2nd round, is Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions. He had a fantastic season last year, finishing as the wide receiver 8 in 2022, but there's still room to grow, which we'll get to in a little bit here. But 7th in targets on the season with 139, 5th in receptions with 106. He's also 6th in yards after the catch per reception, averaging over 5 yards after the catch. And this all comes down to a guy who posted a 32.3% target rate, which was the 3rd highest in the league. He was a target hog in this offense for Detroit last season. What I love heading into this season, he scored just 6 touchdowns, which ranked 19th amongst wide receivers. Now Jamal Williams is gone. 17 touchdowns depart this offense. And if you think the running back position is taking all 17 of those touchdowns, you'd be sadly mistaken. They do not have a pure touchdown scoring machine when it comes to the running back position like they did in Jamal Williams last year. This offensive line can move mountains. They're going to be able to help their running backs score touchdowns, but not the 17 that Jamal Williams scored last year. I think this is an opportunity here where we see these touchdowns being spread out throughout the offense. Jahmyr Gibbs is not a touchdown scoring running back. David Montgomery can score some touchdowns, but he's not nearly as efficient inside the 5 as Jamal Williams was last season. Hasn't been like that in his career. So I think Amon-Ra St. Brown gets more of those touchdown opportunities. This offense is going to continue to score a ton of points. Last season, they were top 5 in scoring offense. They averaged over 26 points per game. So I love what this offense can do as it builds on what it did last season, continues to grow. But when it comes to the competition for targets, there aren't really many changes here for this team offensively. Jameson Williams is obviously a player that can step up in his second season, but missed a ton of time last year with the ACL tear. Now misses this first 6 games of this season after a gambling suspension. Then you look at 33-year-old Marvin Jones stepping in as the wide receiver 3. You have the rookie Sam Laporta. Rookie tight ends don't have a great track record of being successful in the NFL in their first season. Laporta is a player that can definitely hit the ground running, but I don't see him being as a crazy impactful guy any more than what TJ Hawkinson was in those early parts of the year with the Lions. And then Josh Reynolds and Khalif Raymond as those guys available at the second team spot. So Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to post another 100-plus reception season. I'm absolutely positive that if he's healthy. But what will change this season is instead of 6 touchdowns, we might get 9. We might get 10 because these touchdowns are going to be spread out. And Amon-Ra St. Brown has been a absolute best player on the field in practice. If you read any training camp storyline or any beat reporter talking about the Lions, it's about Amon-Ra St. Brown dominating the offense. This is Thursday when I'm recording this. They just had practice today. It had Jared Goff completing 18 passes, 9 of which were to Amon-Ra St. Brown, and he also found the end zone in their red zone work. So must draft Amon-Ra St. Brown in the second round of your drafts. In the third round, I'm looking at Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. He's currently going as the wide receiver 12 in the middle parts of the third round. 306 is where his ADP is currently at. Finishes the wide receiver 25 in 2022. Obviously not going to cut it when you look at his current ADP, but there's a number of things here we look at and we take from last season and then add on to this season. The big thing for me is the offense as a whole. One of the lower scoring offenses in the league. They ranked 22nd in points per game with 19.4, and they also didn't throw the ball very much. Although they finished below 500, they were 21st in pass rate, so even in game scripts where it called for throwing the football, they still weren't doing it that much, and with a pretty inefficient rushing offense too, might I add. But even with that, Olave managed to be top 25 in targets, top 25 in receptions, and top 25 in yards. And that's because he had a 26.7% target share, which was 15th amongst wide receivers. But even more valuable when it comes to a great target share, he also had a really high ADOT and saw a lot of deep targets. He was 9th in ADOT amongst wide receivers, which was at 14 yards. And then he also had the 8th most deep targets. But the problem was Andy Dalton at quarterback. He only caught 25.9% of his deep targets, which was the worst, the second worst amongst players that had 20 plus deep targets. The only person that was worse was Deontay Johnson, who was just as bad, definitely worse when it comes to production from the deep targets. He had 27, Olave did, just 7 receptions and only 1 touchdown too. So you'd like to see these deep targets hit a little bit more often and also a better touchdown rate on these deep targets too. Usually when you're catching, 8 to 10 deep targets, you can score, at least 2 or 3 touchdowns. So that can definitely improve this year. And he had the 4th most unrealized air yards from all those deep targets not hitting. Now he pairs with Derek Carr, who's been top 5 in deep targets the last 2 seasons. So a great partner here for Olave. And I do think Michael Thomas coming in, as much as he could impede on his volume, I do think he's the perfect partner because Thomas can live in those intermediate areas of the field. Olave doesn't necessarily need to score a ton of touchdowns to return on his ADP. I think he gets good volume. He hits some big plays now with Derek Carr stepping in. And touchdowns ultimately are pretty unpredictable year to year. There are some players that have a really great profile, but others that, if you get volume, like a guy like, let's say, Amon-Ra St. Brown, he scored 6 last year. There's definitely an opportunity for Olave to go from 4 to 8, just purely from, it's something you can't predict very easily. Scoring touchdowns can happen any which way, whether it's in the red zone or whether it's on those deep shots. So I like Olave getting some considerable growth here. In the third round, to be honest with you, I hate a lot of the options in the third round. It's a place that if I'm in the back end of the third, I'm reaching for some of the guys I like a little bit more. But a lot of the guys in the third round I'm pretty low on. Olave and Devontae Smith are the 2 that really stick out for me in this part of your drafts. In the fourth round, we're looking at Lamar Jackson of the Baltimore Ravens. He is a player that in the fourth round can go in depending on your drafts and how much your league mates value the quarterback position. He can go anywhere. Like his ADP right now is the beginning of the fourth, so maybe he's not available for you in the fourth, but I've been in a lot of mock drafts where he's available at the tail end of the fourth. So really going to depend on your league, but absolutely if he's available in the fourth round, I really want to draft him. He did finish as the QB 14 last season, but of course missed some time, was the QB 6 in fantasy points per game. What I'm really, really excited about, and honestly can't stop talking about, whether it's on our shorts, whether it's on our TikTok, whether it's here on our long form videos, is the Ravens offense transforming in a major way in 2023. So before we get to what I think Lamar Jackson does from his perspective, the offense in and of itself, the pace is going to jump drastically. They were the 5th slowest in seconds per play last season, and also the 3rd, and also ran the 3rd least plays per game. So ultimately, if you're not running a lot of plays, that's not going to be enough opportunities for me to be able to get fantasy production. Ultimately, I don't care how good the Ravens are. I care about whether or not Lamar Jackson's out there making enough plays. We saw Jameis Winston have a 30-30 season, but be able to be really good for you in fantasy because ultimately he ran a lot of plays and threw the ball a ton. Lamar Jackson's in a spot to be able to do that, and I'll note some of the important things that came from training camp when it comes to this team is emphasizing the fact that they're going to be getting plays in much earlier in the play clock. You're not going to see this team ran into some trouble when it came to calling timeouts or delay of game penalties because they were trying to run things very, very slow. And as well, Monken has talked about, hey, we want to give the ball to Jackson and give him more freedom in the pre-snap process to be able to check out of plays, check into plays, read the opposing defenses, and of course, allow him to be as creative as possible. So I think this is going to lead to an increase in pass rate when you look at Greg Roman's offense and now coming into Todd Monken's offense, because we have experience with Monken calling plays in Cleveland not too long ago. I think there's going to be anywhere from like a 7 to 10% increase in pass rate for this team. But ultimately, what that also means is you're going to see Lamar running out off script, which I think is going to be a good thing because it can ultimately, if this team is good throwing the football, which I think they will be a much better with a more talented wide receiver core, this is the most talented of Jackson's career, I would say. As much as I'm not a huge Odell Beckham Jr. fan, this is the most complete they've had with him, Rashad Bateman if he's healthy, Mark Andrews, and Zay Flowers. I think you'll see these off-script runs be really explosive because you'll see more defenders downfield if this team is passing the ball more, spreading out opposing defenses. You'll see less guys in the box and some more explosive plays on the ground from Jackson. So 4th round, I like being able to grab a quarterback early. And once I'm past the Jackson tier, the only other guys I really like are Deshaun Watson or Tua. So this is really the key area for me to grab quarterback, especially if I've got a pick in the early 4th round, anywhere from like the 4-0 or if any of my draft picks are either 1 through 4, I guess, in my leagues. And finally, player we definitely haven't talked about quite yet, but one I'm really starting to grow on is Alexander Madison of the Minnesota Vikings. He's currently going as the running back 22, more towards the tail end of the 5th round. So we've got an earlier guy here in Lamar Jackson, and now a later guy here in the 5th in Alexander Madison. Madison has averaged in his career 20 PPR fantasy points per game without Cook available. So games that Cook's missed, Madison's been really, really good. It's a constant talk about Madison when you talk about his fantasy opportunity and his fantasy outlook heading into this season. But what really sticks out to me, and I was reading this on The Athletic just yesterday, is the lack of competition behind him is really eye-popping. I think you noticed that from the outset, but it's become even more of a storyline for this Vikings team in training camp because Ty Chandler has not looked good. I was reading up on some fumbling issues in practices, not a lot of confidence in him as a change of pace guy. Kenny Nwangu's missing time right now with an injury. And then Kevin O'Connell said himself that the rookie they took in the 7th round, Dwayne McBride, is going to have a really uphill battle when it comes to understanding this offense in short order. So Madison's kind of got the keys here. And I think being able to let Dalvin Cook go speaks to the confidence, of course, they have in Madison. And then as well, when it comes to these other available options, they don't really have one. So this is going to be Madison's backfield to own here for this team. And this is an offense that's very, very good. They were top 10 last season in points with 24.9 per game. And then even more impressive, they gave up a ton of points, which is a factor here for fantasy. They allowed 25.4 points per game. They allowed more points per game than they scored. They bring in Brian Flores, who I think could elevate their defense, but they lost Zadarius Smith. They lost Dalvin Tomlinson. I'm really worried about this team on the defensive side being any better than they were last year, and they were bad. But Flores is really, really aggressive. He's one of the more, over the course of his career as a defensive coordinator, even a head coach with the Dolphins, his teams have blitzed a ton, and that can create a lot of negative plays and get you the ball back, but it also can give opponents explosive plays and give your offense the ball right back. So I think this team will need to score a lot of points, and that's a huge benefit for Alexander Madison and his fantasy outlook, because if you look at Dalvin Cook last season, he was third in the league inside the 5 carries. He had 17, but he only scored 6 touchdowns on them. Like, this is a number that should be closer to the probably 40 to 50% tier in terms of inside the 5 carries to touchdowns. Like, if we look at even a guy with a really high volume, Jamal Williams was 34 and 17. Who else was pretty good? I can't think of the guys below him off the top of my head, but usually you see guys that are even pretty mediocre and then solid in the 40% to 50% tier. So Madison could be better in that category. He's going to get tons of volume there, because if you look at Kevin O'Connell's offense comes from the Sean McVay tree, they like to run the ball and goal to go. They like to put the ball on the ground more than they like to throw the football. So I think a Jamal Williams type season could be in the cards for Madison. Even if he isn't the most efficient guy, he's going to get so much opportunity in these valuable areas. So I'm really starting to get high on Madison. We talked about him in my running back rankings a little bit too. He's now my RB17, so well ahead of ADP. So I'm definitely taking him in the 5th round. All right, those are my favorite early round targets, rounds 1 to 5 of your fantasy football drafts. Please, guys, let me know what you think in the comments down below. And of course, if you enjoyed today's video, please do drop us up. It would be really, really appreciated. Help us out in a big, big way. Very excited, as you know, we finally saw our first NFL football game on Thursday, an Hall of Fame game. We're getting things going here, getting you ready for your fantasy season, and getting into more fantasy content 5+ days a week for you guys. So thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you on the next one.